a matter of fact, yesterday, before it goes back to the Senate. You know, you've seen it's pretty significant cuts in overall spending at the state, as is necessitated by the fact that we have a constitutionally mandated balanced budget, so that's what we're having to live within the confines of. And, you know, quite honestly, I've been there 7 years, and it seems like every year we're making cuts, and now the cuts are starting to get really deep, and it's really having significant effect on programs, and a lot of the departments are operating at bare bones. I mean, I know there's always rhetoric that we could do better. We can cut administration, we can cut, you know, line staff in places, including teaching staff and the like, and raise student-teacher ratios, and there's always money to cut. But, you know, in my experience in dealing with some of the departments, you know, we're rapidly reaching the point of diminishing returns where if we want to accept the fact that education particularly, we're going to start having some substandard offerings, and that's just what we're going to have to live with, then we're going to have to change things significantly. So, again, we passed the budget, and I'm sure you ladies want to, knowing you're from corrections, want to discuss corrections, and I'm sure you want to talk about schools. So, you know, that's what we're really here for. Interestingly enough, the budget that went through the other day reflects $250 million in cuts to our K-12 system. You know, it was rather disconcerting for me to actually hear some of the spin on that. The governor originally had put out a proposal based on some of the first estimates with the last revenue forecast, and said that we needed to cut about $332 to $339 million in our K-12 schools. So now we're touting this as we actually raise the money going into schools by not cutting them as much, which is ludicrous at best. The fact is we are cutting $250 million out of our school districts, and I can tell you in our two districts here in Chaffee County, Buena Vista and Salida particularly, under the existing scenario, that cuts about $393,000 out of the Salida budget and about $403,000 out of the Buena Vista budget, which is a lot of money. I mean, it really, we start seeing teachers that won't be retained. We're starting to see loss of program. I don't know, we've obviously been watching the stuff that's going on in Salida with moving to a 4-day week, and quite honestly, I'm not a fan of that, because I actually think we need to up our student-teacher time rather than decreasing it, and moving to a 4-day week is really more of a cost shift. I know I read something in the local paper that it saves the district around $153,000 for the school year, but the social costs of that, what does it do to parents that are, you know, both working or single parents that now have a day of either daycare, or now they're going to have latchkey kids at home, and, you know, some of the other problems. Law enforcement will tell you that their costs of operation go up, city services go up, you know, for that matter, even healthcare goes up. So I really hope the district balances before they make their final decision the social costs and what it actually will do to the community by going to a 4-day week. I don't think the savings is quite as pronounced as a lot of the districts feel like it is. And one of the gross inequities with going to a 4-day week is, I know our two school districts in Chaffee County both are locked into master agreements with regard to the teaching staff. So they're BB isn't, okay. But I know Salida, is BB looking at a 4-day week? No. Okay, well that's good. Because I know Salida's looking at a 4-day week, but the teachers will basically have another day for, and I won't say off because they'll use it for preparation and professional development for the most part, but with no resulting cut in pay. But the non-teaching staff will see about a 20% cut in pay, which is pretty devastating to people that aren't making a lot of money in the first place. So it's really not a proportionate cut for the districts. I'm actually carrying the school finance bill in the House. Every year it starts in one of the other bodies. It started in the Senate this year. Senator Bacon carried it in the Senate, and I'm carrying it in the House. And one of the things that I've been working with the governor and both bodies of the legislature is taking the cut at $250 million right now and reducing that by at least $90 million. And that $90 million was a figure that I arrived at by really polling. I represent about 10 rural school districts, and I talked to all the administration within those districts and said, you know, here's the proposed cuts. What does this do to you, and what could you live with? And the feedback from a lot of these districts led me to believe that we need to get the cuts down to at least the 150, 160 range for them to be able to keep programs viable and keep from having to raise student-teacher ratios. And, I always find the talk that student-teacher ratios really aren't the big deal we make it. I would have to disagree. I think we know that data tells us that an ideal student-teacher ratio is somewhere around 14 to 1. We're starting to see a lot of our rural districts pushing 30 to 1, and they would have to be forced to go higher. And a lot of that depends on, of course, the geography and the student population. I mean, let's face it, maybe a white upper-middle-class school district with very little special ed at-risk population might be able to push higher limits and still do well. But for the most part, in rural Colorado, we don't have that luxury. We have a lot of at-risk kids. We have a lot of ELL kids. We have a lot of special ed and special need kids, and that needs to drive the student-teacher ratio down. So, we're going to work very hard to get that cut down. The governor's office at first was somewhat intractable, but now is starting to see the fact that we might actually have the votes to get this out, so they're starting to get on board with us. I think we'll probably actually make some headway with reducing the cuts to our schools, in particular for our rural schools. And that resonated well, and some of the alternatives thrown out were, well, let's figure out a way to do it for just rural schools, and that's very difficult. So it was much easier just to reduce the cut and start talking about some of the things we'll have to do next year. That being said, please chime in any time with comments or concerns. I'm going to have to assume, again, you want to talk about cuts to corrections.
Well, you do that kind of a ratio of teachers. It doesn't help with corrections, but make more people coming into the corrections also. It's not separate.
Well, I agree. I agree. It's pay me now or pay me later.
That's definitely not separate. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be stopped when they're in first, second, and third grade, so they don't end up in corrections.
The good news with some of the corrections, well, a couple of things on the corrections front that are good news. One, your population has been steadily declining, where over the last 5 years previous, you had pretty steady growth in inmate population, but actually over the last 2 years, it's started decreasing pretty significantly, which is a good sign. And it really is not associated with anything like early release programs. The fact that we're actually having less people that are having to be put into the system, which now the argument that we had previously about the private prisons versus the state prisons is becoming somewhat of a moot point, because we're now actually having bed space in our state prisons. I know that it wasn't popular to close the Fort Lyon operation that was part of the budget balancing piece, but luckily I think corrections is because of the fact that your numbers are actually going down. You didn't have to see cuts to the same proportion some of the other departments have seen, at least this year and hopefully next year. Do you have any comment on?
They're just either younger or more the mentally challenged. What do you think? It's not a cakewalk.
No,
that's why I
didn't mean to make it.
no, I don't mean it like that. That's why I mainly came, I'll get in trouble. It's just not a cakewalk job. It's a lot of You know,
Most
that's
very
my